I stood in my childhood living room clutching the envelope I had just snatched back from my brother Derek's hands. The whole family had erupted in laughter at his cruel words about me trying to compensate for not being needed by this family. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I whispered those three words that would change everything: useful to know. The silence that followed was deafening. What happened next destroyed our family forever, but I regret nothing. That morning had started so differently. I woke up in my downtown Portland apartment feeling genuinely excited about Christmas for the first time in years. As a marketing consultant, I had been having my best year financially, and I wanted to share that success with the people I loved most. The envelope sitting on my kitchen counter contained $2,400 in cashier's checks, enough to cover Derek's rent for 3 months. Derek had been struggling since losing his restaurant job back in September. The downtown bistro where he worked as a sous chef had closed permanently during the economic downturn, and finding equivalent work in Seattle's competitive culinary scene had proven nearly impossible. He had been picking up catering gigs and part-time work at a chain restaurant, but it barely covered his basic expenses. What made Derek's situation even more heartbreaking was that he had always been my protector growing up. When our father Harold would criticize my grades or question my career choices, Derek would redirect his attention with jokes or stories about his own adventures. When kids at school made fun of my thick glasses and awkward personality, Derek would somehow appear at just the right moment to walk me to class. He never made a big deal about it, but I always knew he was looking out for me. Our family dynamics had always been complicated. Our mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who measured love through holiday decorations and dinner party perfection. She meant well, but her constant need for everything to appear flawless created an underlying tension in our household. Harold, our father, was emotionally distant, preferring his golf buddies and work colleagues to deep family conversations. Our older sister, Stephanie, had always been the golden child, excelling in everything from academics to athletics to social situations. Derek was the family rebel, the one who chose art school over business, who traveled to Europe after graduation instead of settling down immediately, who dated musicians and poets instead of accountants and lawyers. But beneath his free-spirited exterior, he was the most genuinely caring person in our family. He remembered birthdays without calendar reminders, called Grandpa Joe every Sunday just to chat, and somehow always knew when someone needed encouragement. That's why it had been so easy to say yes when he called me 3 months earlier, his voice tight with embarrassment as he asked for help with groceries. Just until I get back on my feet, Ariana, I hate asking, but I'm choosing between food and electricity this month. I had started sending him $500 monthly without hesitation, and he had made me promise not to tell the family. "You know how they get," he had said. "Mom will worry herself sick, and Dad will launch into one of his lectures about financial responsibility." I had respected his privacy, sending the money through a discreet online transfer each month and never mentioning it during our family phone calls. But as Christmas approached, I realized Derek needed more substantial help. His landlord had been understanding about late payments, but patience only stretched so far. The rent money in that envelope was meant to give him breathing room to find stable employment without the constant stress of potential eviction. As I prepared for the drive to Seattle that morning, I felt proud of my ability to help someone I loved. The envelope represented more than money. It symbolized the security I could provide, the way Derek had once provided emotional security for me. I imagined his face when he opened it, the relief that would wash over his features, the gratitude that would strengthen our already close relationship. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was about the situation I was walking into. Derek had been painting a very different picture of our relationship to the rest of the family, and I was completely unprepared for the betrayal that awaited me. The drive from Portland to Seattle usually took about 3 hours, but I made it in 2.5 because I was so eager to spend Christmas with my family. The December morning was crisp and clear with Mount Hood visible in my rearview mirror as I headed north on Interstate 5. I had loaded my car with carefully chosen gifts for everyone, including a beautiful scarf for Patricia that I had found at a local artisan market and a vintage whiskey for Harold that I knew he would appreciate. As I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, I immediately noticed how perfectly Patricia had decorated the exterior. White lights outlined every window and doorframe, an enormous wreath hung on the front door, and even the mailbox had been wrapped with festive ribbon. The house looked like something from a holiday magazine, which was exactly the effect my mother had intended. But when I walked through the front door, something felt different. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine just as it always did during the holidays, but the atmosphere seemed strained. Family members were gathered in the living room, but conversations felt forced and uncomfortable. I hugged everyone and distributed my initial round of gifts, but I noticed subtle changes in their behavior toward me. Stephanie barely looked up from her phone when I handed her a beautifully wrapped package containing a silk blouse I had special ordered. "Thanks," she mumbled, setting it aside without opening it. Uncle Bill, who usually greeted me with enthusiastic bear hugs, gave me a polite handshake and quickly turned his attention back to the football game on television. Cousin Emma, who was home from college for winter break, seemed nervous around me in a way that felt completely unfamiliar. Even Grandpa Joe, who normally lit up when I arrived and immediately wanted to hear about my work and travels, seemed reserved. He hugged me warmly enough, but then settled back into his favorite armchair without his usual barrage of questions about my latest marketing projects. I attributed the strange energy to typical holiday stress. Christmas always brought out Patricia's perfectionist tendencies, and Harold tended to drink more than usual during family gatherings, which made everyone walk on eggshells. But as the morning progressed, I began to notice more specific signs that something was wrong. During a conversation about current events, I mentioned a successful campaign I had just completed for a nonprofit organization focused on homelessness prevention. Instead of the usual interested questions about my work, Stephanie made a comment about how some people think they can solve everything with money. Uncle Bill chuckled and said something about how throwing cash at problems doesn't always work. The comments felt pointed in a way that confused me. I had always been careful not to flaunt my financial success around my family, and I certainly had never suggested that money solved all problems. But there was an undercurrent of resentment in their remarks that I couldn't understand. Later, while Patricia was in the kitchen preparing Christmas lunch, I overheard Stephanie talking to cousin Emma in the hallway. "Derek says she's always lecturing him about responsibility," Stephanie was saying in a low voice. "Like, we get it. You're successful, but you don't have to make everyone else feel bad about their choices." Emma responded with something I couldn't quite hear, but then Stephanie continued, "He says she gives him money and then acts all superior about it, like she's doing him this huge favor and he should be grateful forever." My stomach dropped as I realized they were talking about me. Derek had been discussing our private financial arrangement with the family, but he was presenting it in a completely different way than what had actually happened. He had asked for my help, I had given it without conditions or lectures, and I had never mentioned it to anyone else out of respect for his privacy. The realization that Derek had been portraying me as condescending and controlling hurt more than I could have imagined. I had thought we were closer than ever, bonded by the trust he had shown in asking for help and the care I had shown in providing it. Instead, he had been using my generosity as ammunition to paint me as the family member who thought she was better than everyone else. I spent the rest of the morning in a fog of confusion and hurt, trying to process this information while maintaining a cheerful Christmas facade. Derek himself seemed completely normal around me, joking and laughing as if nothing had changed. But now I understood why everyone else had been treating me differently. They saw me through the lens of Derek's interpretation of our relationship, and that interpretation made me look like a self-righteous control freak who used money to manipulate people. As we prepared for the traditional gift exchange, I found myself questioning whether I should even give Derek the envelope. But I decided to proceed as planned, hoping that the gesture would somehow clear the air and show the family how much I truly cared about Derek without any ulterior motives. I thought the generous gift would speak for itself and prove that Derek had mischaracterized our relationship. I had no idea how spectacularly that plan was about to backfire. The family gathered in the living room for our traditional Christmas gift exchange around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Patricia had arranged the seating in a perfect circle with the Christmas tree serving as a backdrop for what she hoped would be picture-perfect family memories. The extended family was all present: Uncle Bill and his wife Sarah, cousin Emma with her boyfriend Tyler, and several family friends who had become honorary relatives over the years. What made this particular Christmas even more significant for me was that I had brought Marcus, my boyfriend of 8 months, to meet the family for the first time. Marcus was a financial counselor who worked with families to develop healthy money management strategies, and I had been excited to introduce him to the people who meant the most to me. He was kind, intelligent, and had a wonderful sense of humor that I thought would blend perfectly with our family's dynamic. Marcus sat next to me on the couch, looking handsome in the dark green sweater I had bought him for the occasion. He had already charmed Patricia with compliments about her cooking and had engaged Harold in a surprisingly deep conversation about investment strategies. I felt proud to have him there and hopeful that this Christmas would mark the beginning of his integration into our family traditions. Derek was sitting across from me, looking relaxed and cheerful in his typical casual style. He had always been the most naturally charismatic member of our family, with an easy smile and quick wit that made him the center of attention at gatherings. Watching him joke with Tyler and tease Emma about her new haircut, I felt a rush of affection for my little brother and renewed confidence in my decision to help him financially. Patricia announced that we would begin the gift exchange with the youngest family member and work our way up by age. Emma went first, distributing beautifully wrapped packages that contained handmade jewelry she had been creating in her college art classes. Tyler followed with thoughtful books for each family member, showing he had been paying attention during previous conversations about everyone's interests. When it was my turn, I started with smaller gifts for the extended family members and worked my way toward my immediate family. I gave Patricia the artisan scarf, which she genuinely seemed to love, and Harold the vintage whiskey, which earned me an approving nod. Stephanie received the silk blouse, and despite her earlier coolness, she seemed pleased with the gift once she opened it. Finally, I reached for Derek's envelope. My hands were slightly shaky as I stood up and walked over to where he was sitting. "This one's special," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "I hope it helps with everything you've been dealing with." Derek took the envelope with a curious expression, turning it over in his hands before carefully opening the seal. I watched his face as he unfolded the note I had written, explaining that the enclosed checks would cover his rent for the next 3 months. For just a moment, I saw genuine surprise cross his features, and I thought I detected a flash of gratitude. But then something shifted in his expression. He looked around the room, taking in all the faces watching him expectantly, and I saw calculation replace surprise. Marcus leaned forward, slightly interested to see Derek's reaction to what was obviously a significant gift. Derek cleared his throat and held up the note so everyone could see it. "Well, this is interesting," he said, his voice taking on a theatrical tone that immediately put me on edge. 3 months of rent money. My sister tries to compensate for the fact that she's not needed by this family. The words hit me like a physical blow. The entire room erupted in laughter, with family members finding Derek's comment hilarious rather than cruel. Uncle Bill slapped his knee and chuckled about sibling dynamics, while Sarah made a comment about how money can't buy love. Even Patricia and Harold were smiling, seemingly amused by Derek's characterization of my gift. But I wasn't laughing. I stood frozen in place, feeling like I had been slapped in front of everyone I cared about. Marcus looked shocked and confused, clearly not understanding why everyone found Derek's response funny. The laughter continued for what felt like an eternity, with various family members making additional jokes about my desperate attempt to be relevant. The humiliation was complete and devastating. I had intended the gift as a loving gesture of support, and Derek had turned it into a public mockery of my place in the family. Worse, everyone else had immediately joined in the mockery, suggesting that they shared his assessment of my motivations. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked over to Derek and calmly took the envelope back from his hands. "Useful to know," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. The laughter died abruptly as family members realized that something had shifted. Derek's expression changed from smug amusement to uncertainty, and Marcus reached for my hand as I sat back down beside him. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as everyone began to sense that Derek's joke had crossed a line they hadn't initially recognized. But the damage was done. In that moment, I realized that everything I had believed about my relationship with my family had been built on false foundations, and there was no way to unknow what I had just learned about how they really saw me. The silence that followed my calm retrieval of the envelope stretched uncomfortably across the living room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on my hands, trying to process what had just happened while maintaining some semblance of composure. Marcus squeezed my hand gently, and I could see concern written across his face, even though he was trying to respect my family's dynamics. Patricia was the first to attempt damage control. Now, she said in her cheerful hostess voice, let's not let a little sibling teasing ruin Christmas. Derek, honey, maybe you should thank your sister for such a generous gift. But Derek seemed to double down rather than apologize. I'm just saying, it's a little over the top. Don't you think I mean 3 months of rent? That's like, what, $2,400? Makes you wonder if she can really afford to be throwing money around like that. His comment struck me as odd, and I felt a chill of suspicion. How did Derek know exactly how much money was in the envelope I had written 3 months of rent in my note, but I hadn't specified the dollar amount? The only way he could know the precise figure was if he had done the math based on knowing his actual rent, which meant he had been thinking about this much more than his casual reaction suggested. I need to use the restroom, I said quietly, standing up from the couch. I needed a moment away from all the staring faces and whispered conversations that had started up around the room. As I walked down the hallway toward the guest bathroom, I heard voices coming from the kitchen where Patricia and Sarah were apparently discussing what had just happened. I paused outside the kitchen door, not intending to eavesdrop, but unable to avoid overhearing their conversation. I feel bad for Ariana, Sarah was saying. That was pretty harsh of Derek. Oh, you know how Derek is, Patricia replied. He's always been sensitive about money issues. And honestly, Ariana has been struggling a bit financially herself lately, according to Derek. She probably spent money she couldn't really afford on that gift, which makes it even more awkward. My heart stopped. Derek had been telling people that I was having financial difficulties. That was not only completely false, but it was the opposite of reality. I was having my best year ever professionally, and I had been helping Derek precisely because I was in a position to do so without any strain on my own finances. I continued toward the bathroom, my mind racing with questions about what other lies Derek might have been spreading. Inside the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to make sense of what I was learning. Why would Derek tell people I was struggling financially? What purpose did that serve? When I returned to the living room, I noticed that Marcus had moved closer to Derek and they were engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Derek was speaking in low tones, gesturing with his hands in a way that suggested he was explaining something important. Marcus looked increasingly concerned as Derek continued talking. As I approached them, Marcus looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was a mixture of worry and confusion that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Ariana," Marcus said carefully, "Derek was just telling me about your situation. Why didn't you mention that you were having some financial stress? I could have helped you figure out some strategies, or at least you didn't need to spend money on such an expensive gift for me." I stared at Derek, who had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but not embarrassed enough to correct the lie he had apparently just told my boyfriend. "What situation?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Marcus looked between Derek and me, clearly sensing that he had stepped into something complicated. "Derek mentioned that you've been having some cash flow issues with your business, and that the gift was probably a stretch for your budget right now." The betrayal was breathtaking. Not only had Derek humiliated me publicly, but he was actively sabotaging my relationship with Marcus by spreading completely fabricated stories about my financial situation. I realized that this was a pattern. Derek had been systematically undermining my reputation within the family for months, painting me as simultaneously financially unstable and desperately trying to buy affection. "That's interesting," I said, looking directly at Derek, "because it's completely untrue." Derek's face flushed slightly, but he maintained his casual demeanor. "Come on, Ariana, there's no shame in going through a rough patch. We're all family here." "Except that I'm not going through any kind of rough patch," I replied firmly. "My business is doing extremely well, better than it ever has. I have no cash flow issues, no financial stress, and giving you 3 months of rent money wouldn't have impacted my budget in any meaningful way." The room had gotten quiet again as family members realized they were witnessing a real conflict rather than playful sibling banter. Derek looked trapped, and I could see him calculating his next move. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice taking on a slightly aggressive edge. "Maybe I was wrong about your business situation, but you have to admit the whole thing is a little weird. Like, who gives their brother that much money as a Christmas gift? It feels like you're trying to, I don't know, buy your way into being important or something." Marcus looked shocked by Derek's hostile tone, and I saw several other family members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But what struck me most was the calculated nature of Derek's response. He was deliberately trying to make me look bad in front of Marcus and the rest of the family, and he was using my own generosity as a weapon against me. That's when I realized that Derek's earlier comment about me not being needed by this family might have been more than just a cruel joke. It might have been his genuine belief, and he might have been working actively to make that belief a reality. The question was why I couldn't contain my fury any longer. The combination of Derek's public humiliation, his lies about my financial situation, and his manipulation of Marcus had pushed me beyond my breaking point. I stood up from the couch and walked to the center of the living room, commanding everyone's attention. Actually, Derek, since you want to talk about money and family dynamics, let's have that conversation," I said, my voice carrying an authority that surprised even me. "Let's talk about the $500 I've been sending you every month for the past 3 months to help with your grocery bills." The room went completely silent. Derek's face went pale, and I saw panic flash in his eyes. Patricia and Harold exchanged confused glances, clearly hearing this information for the first time. What groceries?" Patricia asked, looking between Derek and me with growing concern. "The groceries Derek couldn't afford because he lost his job." I continued, feeling a strange sense of calm now that the truth was finally coming out. The groceries he asked me to help with, but made me promise not to tell anyone because he was embarrassed about needing assistance. Derek jumped to his feet, his casual demeanor completely gone. "Ariana, that's private. You have no right to air our personal business in front of everyone. Personal business, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. You just spent the last 10 minutes lying to my boyfriend about my financial situation and telling this entire room that I'm desperately trying to buy my way into family relevance. But my helping you is supposed to remain private. Marcus was watching this exchange with wide eyes, clearly beginning to understand that Derek had been manipulating the narrative around our relationship. Uncle Bill leaned forward in his chair, suddenly much more interested in what was happening. Derek, is this true? Harold asked, his voice taking on the stern tone he had used when we were children. Have you been taking money from your sister? It's not like that, Derek said quickly. She offered to help, and I was going through a rough time, but I never asked her to make a big show about it. You literally called me crying about choosing between food and electricity, I said, my voice becoming sharper. You begged me not to tell the family because you were humiliated about your situation. And now you're standing here acting like I forced my help on you as some kind of power play. Stephanie had put down her phone and was staring at Derek with a confused expression. Derek, you told us you were doing fine. You said you had savings to tide you over until you found a new job. It's complicated. Derek stammered, clearly struggling to maintain his version of events. It's about to get more complicated, I said, feeling a surge of righteous anger. Because, Derek, I know about Mrs. Henderson. Derek's face went white. What about Mrs. Henderson? You know exactly what about Mrs. Henderson, I replied, our 87-year-old neighbor who trusted you enough to give you her grocery money when you told her you were running an errand for her, the $800 you borrowed from her emergency fund and haven't paid back. The room erupted in shocked gasps. Patricia actually stood up from her chair, her hand pressed to her chest. Derek, tell me that's not true. Mrs. Henderson asked me about it last week. I continued, not giving Derek a chance to fabricate another story. She was worried because she needed that money for her prescription medications, but she was too polite to ask you directly for it back. She thought maybe you had forgotten. Derek was looking around the room, desperately seeing the horror and disappointment on everyone's faces. It wasn't stealing, he said weakly. She said I could borrow it. I was planning to pay her back as soon as I got back on my feet. With what money? I demanded. The money I've been sending you for groceries, the rent money you just rejected, or were you planning to ask someone else in this family for another loan while pretending I wasn't already helping you? Harold stood up slowly, his face red with anger. Derek, you stole money from an elderly woman, from Mrs. Henderson, who brought you soup when you were sick as a child. I didn't steal anything, Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. It was a misunderstanding. She offered to help, and I thought, you thought you could take advantage of a kind old woman because you were too proud to let your family know you were struggling. I finished for him, just like you've been taking my money while simultaneously telling everyone that I'm the one with financial problems. Marcus reached for my hand and squeezed it supportively. I could see that he was beginning to understand the full scope of Derek's deception and manipulation. There's more, I said, feeling like a dam had burst inside me. Derek, do you want to tell everyone about Grandpa Joe's account, or should I? The mention of Grandpa Joe's account created an immediate shift in the room's energy. Grandpa Joe himself, who had been sitting quietly in his favorite armchair throughout the confrontation, suddenly looked alert and concerned. What about my account? Grandpa Joe asked, his voice carrying a sharpness that was unusual for his normally gentle demeanor. Derek looked like a cornered animal. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. I didn't. Derek has been accessing Grandpa Joe's emergency account. I said, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil I was experiencing, the account that was set up for genuine medical emergencies and home repairs. Patricia gasped and sank back into her chair. Harold's face was turning an alarming shade of red, and Stephanie looked like she was going to be sick. How much? Grandpa Joe asked quietly, but his question carried the weight of deep betrayal. Derek was now visibly shaking. Just just a few times for emergencies, real emergencies. What kind of emergencies? Harold demanded, his voice booming across the room. I My car needed repairs, and I couldn't get to job interviews without transportation, and my electricity was going to be shut off, which would have made it impossible to keep food fresh or charge my phone for potential employers to reach me. How much, Derek? Grandpa Joe repeated, his voice becoming more insistent. Derek looked down at his hands. Maybe $1,500, but I was going to pay it back. I have a plan. If $1,500, Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. But I could see that Derek was still not telling the complete truth. His body language suggested there was more to the story, and his earlier panic when I mentioned the account indicated that the situation was worse than he was admitting. Derek, I said carefully, I think you need to tell everyone the real amount. That is the real amount, Derek insisted, but his voice cracked slightly. Grandpa Joe slowly reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small notebook that he always carried. He flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. According to my records, there have been 7 withdrawals from my emergency account over the past 4 months, totaling $3,200. The room went completely silent, except for Patricia's sharp intake of breath. Derek, Harold said, his voice dangerously quiet. You stole over $3,000 from your 92-year-old grandfather? It wasn't stealing, Derek said desperately. I had access to the account because Grandpa Joe asked me to help him with banking when his arthritis got bad. He said I could use it for family emergencies. I said you could help me access it for my emergencies, Grandpa Joe corrected firmly. I never gave you permission to treat it as your personal bank account. Derek's defense was crumbling rapidly, and I could see him becoming increasingly desperate as he realized that everyone in the room was beginning to understand the scope of his deception and manipulation. Look, I know it looks bad, Derek said, his voice taking on a pleading quality, but I've been in a really dark place since I lost my job. I felt like I had nowhere to turn, and I was scared to tell anyone how bad things had gotten. So instead of being honest with your family who loves you, Stephanie said, her voice filled with disappointment, you decided to steal from an elderly man and lie about your sister who was actually trying to help you. It's not that simple, Derek protested. Ariana, she acts like she's helping, but there are always strings attached. She makes comments about responsibility and financial planning like she's my mother instead of my sister. I stared at Derek in complete shock. What strings? What comments? I have never said a single word to you about responsibility or financial planning. I've sent you money every month without questions, without lectures, without conditions. But you think those things... Derek said, his voice becoming more agitated. I can see it in your face when we talk. You think I'm a failure who can't take care of himself? Marcus squeezed my hand tighter, and I could see the confusion and concern in his expression as he watched Derek's increasingly irrational behavior. Derek, I said as gently as I could manage, I have never thought you were a failure. I think you're talented and creative and going through a difficult time. That's why I was happy to help you. But Derek was beyond rational conversation now. His humiliation at being exposed had triggered something deeper, and I could see years of insecurity and resentment bubbling to the surface. Happy to help, he repeated bitterly. Right, happy to have someone dependent on you so you can feel important and needed. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I realized that this confrontation was about much more than money or Christmas gifts. Derek had been carrying around a narrative about our relationship that was completely disconnected from reality, and that narrative had been driving his behavior for months. The room remained tense and silent as Derek's words echoed in everyone's minds. But then Stephanie suddenly spoke up, her voice cutting through the uncomfortable atmosphere. Actually, Derek, I need to say something, Stephanie said, standing up from her chair. You came to me 3 weeks ago asking for money. Derek's head snapped toward our sister, panic returning to his eyes. Stephanie, that's not. You told me that Ariana had cut you off financially because you two had gotten into some argument. Stephanie continued, her voice growing stronger. You said she was being vindictive about your unemployment and that you needed help buying Christmas gifts for the family. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Derek had been systematically lying to multiple family members, creating entirely fictional versions of our relationship to manipulate them into giving him money. I felt so sorry for you. Stephanie went on, her voice filled with hurt and anger. I gave you $300 from my Christmas bonus at work because I thought Ariana was being cruel to you during a difficult time. Patricia was shaking her head in disbelief. Derek, how could you lie like that? And it wasn't just Stephanie. Uncle Bill suddenly interjected, his voice heavy with realization. Derek, you asked me for money 2 months ago, said there was a family emergency and you needed to help cover some medical expenses. Sarah, Uncle Bill's wife, looked stricken. He asked us for $500. We gave it to him because he said it was urgent. Family emergency, I repeated, staring at Derek. What family emergency? Derek was looking around the room frantically as more and more of his lies were being exposed. There was going to be an emergency. I was trying to prevent it. Cousin Emma suddenly gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my God, Derek asked me for money too. He said he needed $50 for gas to drive to job interviews because his tank was empty and he wouldn't get paid from his catering job until next week. Tyler, Emma's boyfriend, looked confused. But didn't you just say you've been getting money from Ariana for months? Why would you need to borrow gas money from a college student? The web of Derek's deception was unraveling rapidly, and I could see him becoming more desperate as each lie was exposed. But what shocked me most was discovering how many people Derek had approached for money while painting me as the sister who had abandoned him. Derek, Grandpa Joe said quietly, did you take money from anyone else? Derek's silence was answer enough. The Hendersons next door, Harold said suddenly, realization dawning on his face. Betty Henderson mentioned to me at the grocery store that Derek had borrowed some money for an emergency. She was worried because he seemed so stressed. How much did you take from them? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. It wasn't taking, Derek said weakly. Everyone offered to help. I didn't force anyone. But you lied to all of them about the circumstances, Marcus said, speaking up for the first time since the confrontations had begun. You created false emergencies and fictional family conflicts to manipulate people into giving you money. I could see that Derek's house of cards was completely collapsed now. He had borrowed money from Stephanie, Uncle Bill, Cousin Emma, the neighbors, and Grandpa Joe, all while receiving monthly assistance from me. He had told each person a different story about why he needed help, often painting me as unsympathetic or unavailable. Derek, how much money have you taken from this family? Patricia asked, her voice shaking. Derek sat down heavily in his chair, his face in his hands. I don't know. I wasn't keeping track. I was just trying to survive. Well, let's keep track now, Harold said grimly. He began counting on his fingers. 300 from Stephanie, 500 from Bill and Sarah, 50 from Emma, 800 from Mrs. Henderson, over 3,000 from Dad's emergency account, and who knows how much from other neighbors. Plus the 1,500 I sent you over 3 months, I added. That's over $6,000, Stephanie said, her voice filled with horror. Derek, you've stolen over $6,000 from your own family and neighbors. The number hung in the air like an accusation, and I could see the impact it had on everyone in the room. This wasn't just about Derek having financial difficulties. This was about systematic deception and manipulation of the people who cared about him most. But what made it even worse was realizing that while Derek was taking money from everyone, he was simultaneously working to undermine my relationships with those same people by spreading lies about my character and motivations. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you work so hard to make everyone think I was the problem when I was the one helping you the most? Derek looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and for the first time that day, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse on his face. Derek's facade finally cracked completely. The tears in his eyes spilled over, and his whole body began to shake as the weight of his deception became impossible to bear. But instead of the remorse I had hoped to see, what emerged was raw anger and desperation. You want to know why? Derek shouted, jumping to his feet so suddenly that several people flinched. Because everything comes so easily to you, Ariana. You have your perfect job, your perfect apartment, your perfect life, and you get to swoop in and save the day whenever you want. His voice was becoming increasingly hysterical, and I could see Marcus tense beside me, ready to intervene if Derek's behavior escalated further. Derek, calm down, Harold said firmly, but Derek was beyond responding to reason. I'm tired of being the family failure, Derek continued, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm tired of everyone looking at me like I'm broken while Ariana gets to be the successful one who has her life together. Nobody thinks you're a failure, Patricia said desperately, tears starting to form in her own eyes. We love you, Derek. We want to help you. Help me, Derek laughed bitterly. Help me what? Help me be more like Ariana. Help me get a boring corporate job and a boring corporate boyfriend and a boring corporate life. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly stung by Derek's characterization, but he remained quiet and supportive. Derek, that's not fair, Stephanie said. Ariana works hard for what she has. She's not trying to make you feel bad about your choices. But Derek was spiraling now, and nothing anyone said was going to reach him. You don't understand the pressure, he yelled. Every family gathering, every phone call, it's all about how well Ariana is doing, and when am I going to get my life together, like her? That's not true, I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the emotional chaos erupting around me. I have never compared our lives or suggested that you should be doing anything differently. You don't have to say it, Derek screamed. It's implied in everything you do. Every time you send me money, every time you offer to help, it's a reminder that I can't take care of myself. The room fell silent except for Derek's heavy breathing and Patricia's quiet sobbing. I could see that Derek's perception of reality was completely distorted by his own insecurities and shame, but that didn't make his words any less hurtful. Derek, Grandpa Joe said gently, sit down, son. Let's talk about this calmly. But Derek was beyond calm conversation. No, I'm done pretending everything is fine. You want to know where all the money went. You want to know why I needed so much help. He turned to face the entire room, his face flushed with anger and desperation. I've been gambling all of it. Every dollar you gave me, every dollar I borrowed, every dollar I stole. It all went to the casino. The room erupted in gasps and shocked exclamation. Patricia actually cried out as if she had been physically struck. I owe $12,000 to people who don't mess around. Derek continued, his voice becoming more frantic. People who have made it very clear what happens if I don't pay them back. I've been living in terror for weeks, checking over my shoulder everywhere I go, wondering if today is the day they decide to send a message. The confession hung in the air like a toxic bomb, affecting everyone differently, but devastating them all. Harold sank into his chair, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Stephanie was crying openly now, and Uncle Bill was shaking his head in disbelief. So yes, I took your money, and I lied about why, and I tried to make you all think Ariana was the problem instead of me, Derek said, his voice breaking completely. Because I was ashamed and scared and I didn't know how else to handle it. Marcus leaned close to me and whispered, Are you okay? His concern was touching, but I felt numb, like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. Derek collapsed back into his chair, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I screwed up everything, but I don't know how to fix it. These people, they're not going to wait much longer for their money. The room was filled with the sound of Derek's crying and Patricia's quiet sobs. Everyone else seemed to be in shock, trying to process the revelation that Derek's financial troubles were much more serious and self-inflicted than anyone had imagined. Dear Derek, Harold said, finally his voice heavy with exhaustion. Gambling addiction is a serious problem. We need to get you professional help. Help won't matter if I'm dead, Derek said through his tears. These people don't care about addiction or treatment programs. They just want their money. As I sat there listening to Derek's confession and breakdown, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that the truth was finally coming out, and that everyone could see how Derek had manipulated the situation. But another part of me felt genuine fear for his safety and deep sadness that his pride and shame had led him to such a destructive path. What I didn't expect was what happened next. The way the family would respond to Derek's revelation and how quickly they would turn their attention back to me. The initial shock of Derek's gambling confession lasts only a few minutes before the family's protective instincts kicked in. But instead of the healthy boundaries and tough love that Derek desperately needed, what emerged was a familiar pattern of enabling behavior that made my stomach turn. Patricia was the first to shift into crisis management mode. She stopped crying and immediately began talking about solutions. Okay, this is serious, but we can figure this out, she said, her voice taking on the forceful determination she usually reserved for party planning emergencies. $12,000 is a lot of money, but it's not impossible if we all work together. Harold nodded grimly. We'll need to make a plan, figure out who can contribute what and when. I watched in disbelief as my family began strategizing how to bail Derek out of his gambling debts without once addressing the underlying issues that had led to this crisis. There was no discussion of consequences for his theft and deception, no mention of the need for accountability or treatment, just immediate focus on throwing money at the problem. I can probably contribute $1,000 from my savings account, Stephanie said, still sniffling from her tears, but already calculating her potential contribution. We can match that, Uncle Bill added, looking at his wife for confirmation. Sarah, what do you think? Of course, Sarah agreed quickly. Family comes first. I felt like I was watching a surreal performance where everyone had forgotten what had just happened. Derek had systematically lied to and stolen from every person in this room, yet they were already mobilizing to give him even more money. That's $3,000 so far, Patricia said, apparently keeping a running tally. Derek, how quickly do you need to pay these people back? Derek wiped his eyes and looked around the room with what appeared to be cautious hope. They want the full amount by New Year's Day. That's less than a week. Then we don't have time to waste, Harold said decisively. He turned to look at me directly. Ariana, you're in the best financial position of anyone here. How much can you contribute? The question hit me like a physical blow. After everything that had just been revealed, Derek's lies about me, his theft from multiple family members, his systematic manipulation of everyone's emotions, they expected me to be the primary solution to his problem. Are you serious right now? I asked, my voice barely containing my incredulity. Derek made mistakes, but he's family, Patricia said firmly. We don't abandon family when they're in real danger. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me, and I could feel his confusion and concern as he watched my family's reaction to the crisis. You want me to give Derek money? I said, slowly trying to make sure I understood correctly, after he just humiliated me, publicly lied about me to everyone in this room, and admitted to systematically stealing from all of us. It's not about what he did wrong, Harold said impatiently. It's about keeping him safe. These people he owes money to are dangerous. We can deal with family issues after we deal with the immediate threat. I looked around the room and saw that everyone was nodding in agreement with Harold's assessment. They genuinely believed that paying off Derek's gambling debts should be my priority, regardless of how he had treated me. Besides, Stephanie added, you brought that envelope with 3 months of rent money. That's probably $2,400 right there. Combined with what everyone else can contribute, we'd be most of the way to $12,000. The casual assumption that my money should automatically be redirected to solve Derek's crisis was breathtaking in its entitlement. Ariana. Patricia said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. I know Derek hurt your feelings today, but this is bigger than hurt feelings. This is about his safety, possibly his life. Marcus leaned closer to me and whispered, this doesn't seem right. He humiliated you and stole from everyone, and now they want you to bail him out. His quiet support gave me strength, but I could see that my family was watching our whispered conversation with growing impatience. What's there to discuss? Harold asked, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. Derek needs $12,000, and Ariana has the means to provide a significant portion of that amount. The math is simple. The math might be simple, I said, finding my voice, but the situation is not. What do you mean? Patricia asked, looking confused. I mean that giving Derek money right now would be enabling his addiction and rewarding his abusive behavior toward me and everyone else in this family. The room went quiet again, but this time the silence felt hostile rather than shocked. So, you're going to let your brother get hurt because you're angry about some Christmas drama? Stephanie asked, her voice carrying clear disapproval. Some Christmas drama. I repeated, my voice rising slightly. He lied about me for months, manipulated all of you into giving him money under false pretenses, stole from an elderly woman and our grandfather, and then publicly humiliated me when I tried to help him. That's not drama, that's systematic, emotional, and financial abuse. Don't be so dramatic, Harold said dismissively. Derek was desperate and made some bad choices. That doesn't make him an abuser. I looked at Marcus, who was staring at my family with an expression of complete bewilderment. I could see him struggling to understand how they could minimize Derek's behavior so completely. You're really going to prioritize your hurt feelings over Derek's safety? Patricia asked, her voice becoming sharp with criticism. And that's when I realized that nothing had really changed. Derek's confession hadn't opened my family's eyes to his manipulative behavior. It had simply given them a new crisis to rally around while continuing to cast me as a selfish family member who cared more about money than people. The irony was devastating. I was being accused of prioritizing money over family by people who were asking me to prove my love for family by giving them money. I stood up, slowly feeling a calm resolve settle over me, despite the chaos swirling around the room. Everyone's eyes were on me, waiting for my decision about Derek's gambling debts, but I had a very different announcement to make. I'm not giving Derek any money, I said clearly. Not for his debts, not for his rent, and not for his gambling addiction treatment. Patricia gasped as if I had slapped her. Ariana, you can't be serious. These are dangerous people Derek owes money to. I'm completely serious. I continued, my voice growing stronger. But that's not all. I'm also stopping all financial support I've been providing to this family. The confused silence that followed told me that most of them had no idea what I was talking about. What financial support? Stephanie asked, looking genuinely puzzled. I took a deep breath and began listing the monthly payments I had been making quietly for the past 2 years. Mom, I've been paying for your spa membership at Serenity Springs, your monthly massage therapy sessions, and your hair appointments at that expensive salon downtown. That's about $800 a month. Patricia's face went white. I thought those were covered by my insurance. Dad, I've been covering your golf club membership fees, your monthly golf lessons with the Club Pro, and the insurance premiums on your vintage car collection. That's roughly $1,200 monthly. Harold opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Stephanie, I've been making the payments on your car lease for the past 18 months. plus your gym membership and those photography classes you wanted to take, about $600 monthly. Stephanie looked like she had been punched in the stomach, but the lease company said my payments were current. Yeah, pa. And Grandpa Joe, I've been covering the copays on all your prescription medications because Medicare doesn't cover everything, plus the cost of your home health aide who comes twice a week. That's about $400 monthly. The room was completely silent now as everyone absorbed the reality of how much I had been contributing to their lives without any recognition or gratitude. That's over $3,000 every month that I've been quietly providing to keep all of you comfortable, I continued, for 2 years. That's over $72,000 in support that none of you knew about because I never wanted to make anyone feel obligated or uncomfortable. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and shock. I don't think he had fully understood the extent of my generosity toward my family until that moment. But here's what makes this situation so incredibly painful, I said, my voice beginning to crack with emotion. While I was supporting all of you financially, Derek was telling you that I was selfish, controlling, and that I looked down on this family, and instead of defending me or questioning his narrative, you all believed him. Ariana, we didn't know, Patricia whispered. You didn't know about the financial support, but you did know Derek's characterization of me was cruel and unfair. You heard him say I wasn't needed by this family, and you laughed. You thought it was funny that Derek publicly rejected my attempt to help him. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each family member as I continued. Derek's gambling addiction doesn't excuse the way he systematically worked to turn all of you against me while I was supporting him and everyone else in this family, and your desperation to help him now doesn't excuse the way you're dismissing his abusive behavior toward me. Harold stood up, his face red with anger. Now you're being ridiculous. Derek wasn't abusive. He was struggling with addiction and made some poor choices. Dad, he spent months telling lies about my character and financial situation to justify borrowing money from family and neighbors. He manipulated all of you into seeing me as selfish and controlling while I was actually being incredibly generous. That's psychological manipulation, and it caused real harm to my relationships with all of you. You're overreacting, Stephanie said, but her voice lacked conviction. When I walked in here today, you barely acknowledged my presence. Uncle Bill treated me like a stranger. Emma seemed nervous around me. Grandpa Joe was distant and reserved. Derek's lies had poisoned my relationships with everyone in this family, and none of you cared enough about me to question his narrative or defend me. Marcus reached for my hand and squeezed it supportively. His touch gave me strength to continue. So here's what's gonna happen, I said, feeling more confident with each word. I'm ending all financial support to everyone in this family. No more spa treatments, no more golf memberships, no more car payments, no more prescription copays, nothing. Ariana, please, Patricia begged, tears streaming down her face. Don't punish all of us for Derek's mistakes. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied calmly. I'm simply choosing to stop enabling a family dynamic where I'm taken for granted, disrespected, and blamed for problems I didn't create while simultaneously being expected to solve those problems with my money. The desperation on everyone's faces was becoming more apparent as they began to understand the full implications of my decision. You can't just abandon your family, Harold said angrily. We raised you. We love you, and family has responsibilities to each other. You're absolutely right about family having responsibilities, I agreed. Family should love, support, and respect each other. Family should defend each other against unfair attacks. Family should show gratitude for help received and not take generosity for granted. This family has failed to meet those responsibilities toward me for years. Derek had been sitting silently through my entire speech, but now he looked up with desperate eyes. Ariana, I know I messed up. I know I said terrible things, but if you don't help me with this debt, I could really get hurt. Derek, your gambling addiction and the debts you accumulated are your responsibility. Getting help for your addiction is your responsibility. Making amends to the people you stole from is your responsibility. I will not enable your addiction by bailing you out of the consequences of your choices. So you're just going to let him get beaten up or worse? Stephanie asked accusingly. I'm going to let him experience the natural consequences of his actions, which is the only way people with addictions learn to change their behavior. Giving him money now would simply teach him that he can manipulate and abuse family members and still get rescued when his choices catch up with him. The room erupted in protests and arguments as family members tried various tactics to change my mind, but I felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I was setting healthy boundaries and refusing to enable dysfunction, and it felt liberating despite the pain of seeing my family's true priorities so clearly. As the reality of my decision began to sink in, the family's desperation became increasingly apparent. They started talking over each other, trying to calculate how they would manage without the financial support they hadn't even known they were receiving. Patricia was the first to fully grasp her situation. Ariana, honey, I can't afford the spa treatments and hair appointments without your help. Those aren't luxuries for me. They're part of how I maintain my appearance for your father's business functions. Then Dad's business will need to budget for those expenses, I replied calmly. Harold immediately jumped in. The golf club membership isn't just recreation. It's where I do most of my networking. Losing that membership could hurt my consulting income. Then you'll need to find more cost-effective networking opportunities, I said. Stephanie was frantically calculating on her phone. Ariana, if I have to start making my own car payments, I'll have to move back in with Mom and Dad. I can't afford my apartment and a car payment on my salary. Then you'll need to make some decisions about your priorities and budget, I responded. The panic was spreading as each family member began to understand how significantly their lifestyle would change without my quiet support. But what disturbed me most was that they were treating these revelations as if I had somehow deceived them, rather than recognizing that I had been extraordinarily generous. Why didn't you tell us you were paying for all these things? Uncle Bill asked, his voice carrying an accusatory tone. Because I wanted to help without making anyone feel obligated or indebted, I explained. I thought I was being considerate by handling these expenses quietly. But now you're using our dependence on your help to manipulate us, Stephanie said angrily. Marcus made a sound of disbelief beside me. Are you seriously accusing her of manipulation after everything Derek just confessed to? No, this is different, Harold said defensively. Ariana built a system where we were dependent on her without knowing it, and now she's pulling the rug out from under us. I stared at my father, amazed by his ability to reframe my generosity as a character flaw. Dad, I've been helping this family for 2 years without ever asking for anything in return, without keeping score, and without making anyone feel bad about needing help. That's the opposite of manipulation. But the family was clearly feeling cornered and desperate, which was bringing out their worst instincts. Instead of expressing gratitude for the years of support I had provided, they were focusing on their anger about losing that support. We need to focus on the immediate crisis, Patricia said, trying to regain control of the situation. Derek needs $12,000 by New Year's Day. That's less than a week away. And we've just learned that our monthly budgets are about to become much tighter, Harold added grimly. Uncle Bill pulled out his phone and began making calculations. Even if we pool all our resources, I don't think we can come up with $12,000 without Ariana's contribution. Then Derek will need to find another solution, I said firmly. Like what? Stephanie demanded. Who else is going to lend him $12,000? His credit is destroyed. He has no collateral and he's unemployed. Those are all consequences of his choices, I replied. Maybe he should have thought about those factors before he decided to gamble away thousands of dollars that belonged to other people. Derek looked up from his chair, his face streaked with tears. Ariana, I know you hate me right now and I understand why. But these people I owe money to don't care about addiction or family dynamics. They just want their money, and they've made it clear what happens if they don't get it. Derek, I don't hate you, I said honestly, but I also won't enable your addiction by rescuing you from the consequences of your gambling. Oh, so you'd rather see him get hurt than admit you're being vindictive? Patricia said, her voice sharp with accusation. I'd rather see him get the help he needs for his addiction, make genuine amends to the people he's hurt, and learn that his family won't bail him out every time his poor choices catch up with him. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the finality of my position. I could see them looking at each other desperately, trying to figure out how to proceed without my financial participation. Grandpa Joe, who had been quiet through most of the arguing, finally spoke up. How much money do I have left in my emergency account? Derek looked ashamed. After what I took, maybe $700. That's not nearly enough, Harold said, shaking his head. Emma suddenly looked panicked. Wait, if Ariana stops helping Grandpa Joe with his prescription costs, and Derek took most of his emergency money, how is he going to afford his medications? The question hung in the air like another crisis waiting to explode. I felt a pang of genuine concern for my grandfather, but I also knew that continuing to enable this family's financial dysfunction wouldn't help anyone in the long run. Grandpa Joe will need to work with his doctor and Medicare to find more affordable options, I said, or the family will need to prioritize his medical needs over Derek's gambling debts. You're really going to make us choose between Derek's safety and Grandpa Joe's medications? Stephanie asked incredulously. I'm not making you choose anything, I replied. You're dealing with the natural consequences of Derek's theft and your family's poor financial planning. These are choices Derek made when he stole from Grandpa Joe's emergency fund. Marcus leaned close to me and whispered, Are you sure you want to completely cut off your grandfather? He's the victim in Derek's theft. His question gave me pause. Grandpa Joe was indeed the innocent victim in Derek's schemes, and punishing him felt wrong. But I also knew that if I made exceptions for some family members, the others would use guilt and manipulation to try to get me to make exceptions for them too. I need to think about Grandpa Joe's situation separately, I said out loud, but Derek's gambling debts are absolutely not my responsibility. The family seized on my moment of uncertainty about my grandfather as a sign that my resolve might be weakening overall. Patricia immediately jumped on my hesitation about Grandpa Joe's medications as an opening to launch a full emotional assault designed to break down my resistance. See, I knew you couldn't really abandon family when it comes down to it, she said, her voice becoming warm and manipulative. You have such a good heart, Ariana. That's why we know you'll do the right thing for Derek, too. She moved closer to me, reaching for my hands in a gesture that was clearly calculated to appear loving while actually being coercive. Derek made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he's still your little brother. The little boy who used to protect you from bullies and walk you to school when you were scared. I pulled my hands away from hers, recognizing the manipulation tactic. Mom Derek's childhood protectiveness doesn't erase his adult abusiveness. But Patricia wasn't giving up. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she launched into a performance worthy of a daytime drama. I'm begging you to think about Derek's safety. These people he owes money to aren't going to care about addiction or family problems. They're going to hurt him maybe seriously. Harold joined the emotional manipulation campaign. Ariana, you're angry and you have every right to be, but you can't let anger cloud your judgment when your brother's life might be at stake. This isn't about anger, I said firmly. This is about refusing to enable destructive behavior. Enable, Stephanie repeated, her voice rising with indignation. Derek could end up in the hospital or worse, and you're worried about enabling. Uncle Bill decided to try a different approach, appealing to my sense of family loyalty. Ariana, I understand you feel hurt and betrayed, but family sticks together through the worst times. That's what makes us a family. Where was that family loyalty when Derek was lying about me for months, I asked. Where was the family support when he was systematically undermining my relationships with all of you? Sarah tried the guilt angle. Derek was sick, honey. Gambling addiction is a real disease. You wouldn't abandon him if he had cancer, would you? If Derek had cancer, I would absolutely support him getting treatment, I replied. But I wouldn't give him money to buy more cigarettes, which is essentially what you're asking me to do by paying off his gambling debts. Cousin Emma attempted the fear approach. Ariana, what if something really bad happens to Derek? How will you live with yourself, knowing you could have prevented it? Her words hit their target, and I felt a flash of genuine fear about Derek's safety. But Marcus squeezed my hand and whispered, "You can't control the actions of loan sharks. Derek created this danger through his own choices." Derek himself had been watching this coordinated emotional assault with calculating eyes. When he saw that I was wavering slightly due to Emma's fear tactics, he decided to make his own desperate play. "Ariana," he said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine remorse. "I know I don't deserve your help after what I've done. I know I betrayed your trust and hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable." He stood up and walked toward me, his hands outstretched in a gesture of supplication. "But I'm begging you not for forgiveness, because I don't deserve that yet, but for the chance to make things right. I can't make things right if I'm dead." The raw emotion in his voice was compelling, and for a moment I felt my resolve weakening. This was my little brother, the person who had once protected me from playground bullies and middle school humiliation. But then Derek made a critical mistake. As he continued his emotional appeal, I saw him glance quickly at the envelope I was still holding, the envelope containing his rent money. It was just a fleeting look, but it revealed that even in this moment of apparent vulnerability, he was still calculating how to get my money. "Derek," I said quietly, "are you genuinely sorry for how you treated me, or are you just sorry that you got caught and need my help to avoid consequences?" Derek's face flickered with something that looked like irritation before he quickly covered it with more manufactured remorse. "I'm sorry for everything, Ariana. For lying, for stealing, for making everyone think badly of you. I know I messed up. But you're not sorry enough to face the consequences of your actions without expecting me to rescue you," I observed. "That's not fair," Patricia interjected. "Derek's apologizing and asking for help. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I wanted genuine accountability and change," I said, "not a performance designed to get money." The family's desperation was reaching a crescendo as they realized that their emotional manipulation wasn't working. Harold's face was turning red with frustration, and Stephanie was crying angry tears. "Shh, fine," Harold said, his voice becoming harsh. "If something happens to Derek because you refuse to help him when you easily could have, that's on your conscience. We'll know that you chose money over family when it really mattered." His words were designed to create lasting guilt and shame, but they had the opposite effect. They clarified exactly what this family thought of me. I was valuable to them only for my financial resources, and my worth as a person was measured entirely by my willingness to give them money. "Dad," I said calmly, "the fact that you think this situation is about me choosing money over family shows how little you understand what's actually happening here." "Then explain it to us," Stephanie said challengingly. "Explain how letting Derek get hurt serves any good purpose." Before I could answer, Marcus stood up beside me, and I could see that he had reached his limit with my family's behavior. Marcus stepped slightly forward, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger. As a financial counselor, he had clearly seen enough dysfunctional family money dynamics to recognize what was happening, and he wasn't going to stay silent any longer. "I need to say something here, because what I've witnessed today is absolutely disgusting," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that immediately commanded attention. The room fell silent, with everyone turning to stare at this relative stranger who was inserting himself into our family crisis. "I'm a financial counselor. Marcus continued, which means I work with families dealing with money issues every day. I've seen financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and enabling behavior in hundreds of families. But I have never seen anything as systematic and cruel as what Derek has done to Ariana and what you all are doing to her right now. Patricia opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus held up his hand to stop her. Derek spent months lying about Ariana to all of you while she was secretly supporting not just him, but everyone in this family. He painted her as selfish and controlling while she was quietly paying for your spa treatments, your golf memberships, your car payments, and your grandfather's medications. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. When Derek's gambling addiction created a crisis, none of you apologized to Ariana for believing his lies about her. None of you thanked her for the years of financial support she provided. Instead, you immediately expected her to solve Derek's problem with her money. Harold started to interrupt, but Marcus cut him off. I'm not finished. Derek publicly humiliated Ariana in front of me and your entire family. He rejected her generous gift in the cruelest possible way designed to make her feel unwanted and unneeded. And when that backfired and his lies were exposed, instead of defending her or demanding that Derek apologize, you started pressuring her to give him money. Stephanie looked angry at being called out by someone she barely knew. You don't understand our family dynamics. This is more complicated than you realize. Actually, it's very simple, Marcus replied. This is a textbook example of financial and emotional abuse. Derek systematically undermined Ariana's relationships with all of you to prevent you from comparing notes about his requests for money. He isolated her emotionally while making her financially responsible for everyone's comfort. Marcus turned to look directly at Derek. And you, Derek, your gambling addiction doesn't excuse what you did to your sister. Addiction explains destructive behavior. It doesn't justify abuse. You deliberately and systematically worked to turn your family against the one person who was helping you the most. Derek's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. You don't know what you're talking about. You've been dating my sister for a few months. I've been her brother for 28 years. And in those 28 years, what have you given her besides stress and financial drain and emotional manipulation? Marcus shot back. Because from what I can see, she's been carrying this entire family financially while you've been actively working to make her feel like an outsider. Marcus moved closer to me, his support evident in his posture. Ariana, when you told me about your family, you described people who loved and supported each other. What I've seen today is a group of people who take your generosity for granted while simultaneously resenting you for being successful enough to provide that generosity. The room was completely silent now, with family members looking uncomfortable under Marcus's accurate assessment of their behavior. And now, Marcus continued, when Derek's choices have created a genuine crisis instead of holding him accountable, you're all ganging up on Ariana to make her responsible for fixing a problem she didn't create. Patricia finally found her voice. We love Ariana. We're not ganging up on anyone. We're trying to save Derek's life. By sacrificing Ariana's emotional well-being and financial security, Marcus replied immediately, you're asking her to reward Derek's abusive behavior with thousands of dollars while none of you have even apologized for believing his lies about her character. Uncle Bill looked defensive. We didn't know Derek was lying about Ariana. But you should have questioned his stories, Marcus said firmly. Derek's characterization of Ariana as selfish and controlling should have seemed completely inconsistent with the generous, caring person you all know her to be. The fact that you believed his lies so readily suggests that part of you wanted to believe them. Sarah looked stricken by Marcus's observation. That's not true. We love Ariana. You love what Ariana provides for you, Marcus corrected. You love her financial support and her willingness to solve problems. But you don't respect her enough to defend her against unfair attacks or include her in family decisions that affect her. Marcus turned back to address the entire room. In healthy families, when one member is struggling with addiction, the family comes together to support that person while maintaining healthy boundaries. They don't expect one family member to bankroll the addiction or bail out the addict from consequences. Harold's face was red with anger. You have no right to lecture us about our family. You're not even part of this family. You're absolutely right, Marcus said calmly. I'm not part of this family, which means I can see clearly what you're all too invested to recognize. This family has been financially and emotionally abusing Ariana for years, and she's finally strong enough to stop allowing it. The accusation of abuse hung in the air like a bomb, and I could see that it had hit its target. Family members were looking at each other uncomfortably, beginning to question whether their treatment of me really had been as loving and supportive as they believed. Derek stood up angrily. This is bullshit. I made mistakes, but I never abused anyone. And my family isn't abusive. We're just going through a crisis. Derek, I said quietly, finding my voice again. Spending months telling lies about my character while taking my money, then publicly humiliating me when I tried to help you more. That's textbook emotional abuse. And expecting her to solve your crisis with her money while dismissing her legitimate hurt feelings, Marcus added, that's financial abuse. The room erupted in protests and denials, but I felt a sense of clarity and strength that I hadn't experienced in years. Marcus had given voice to feelings I hadn't even fully acknowledged, and his outside perspective had validated my decision to establish boundaries. Marcus is right, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. This family has treated me like an ATM with emotions valuable for what I can provide, but not deserving of respect or genuine care. With Marcus's support giving me strength, I felt ready to reveal the full extent of my preparation for this moment. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a thick manila folder that I had been carrying for months. There's something else you all need to know, I said, setting the folder on the coffee table where everyone could see it. I've been documenting everything. The room went completely still as family members stared at the folder with growing apprehension. I opened it to reveal organized sections of bank statements, copies of money transfers, printed emails and text messages, and detailed handwritten notes with dates and times. Every financial transaction, every conversation, every lie Derek told about me, every manipulation, I have records of all of it, all. Derek's face went white. What are you talking about? I'm talking about legal protection, I said calmly. Derek, this folder contains evidence of your unauthorized access to Grandpa Joe's bank account, which constitutes elder financial abuse under Washington state law. Grandpa Joe looked shocked. Elder abuse. Yes, Grandpa, when Derek used his access to your emergency account for his own purposes without your knowledge or consent, that legally qualifies as financial exploitation of an elderly person. I pulled out a section of documents and placed them on the table. I have copies of all the withdrawals Derek made from your account, along with his own admissions about where that money went. I also have documentation of the money he took from Mrs. Henderson, who is 87 years old, which constitutes another instance of elder financial abuse. Patricia was staring at the documents with growing horror. Ariana, you're not going to get your own brother arrested, are you? I've already contacted Elder Protective Services, I said matter-of-factly. They're opening an investigation into Derek's exploitation of elderly victims. I filed the report this morning before I came here. Derek jumped to his feet, panic written across his face. You called the state on me, your own brother. I called the state to protect vulnerable elderly people from a person who was systematically stealing from them, I corrected. The fact that the person was my brother doesn't make his crimes less serious. Harold was shaking his head in disbelief. Ariana, how could you betray family like this? Dad Derek betrayed this family when he decided to steal from his own grandfather and elderly neighbors. I'm protecting future victims and ensuring there are consequences for his actions. I pulled out another section of the folder. I also have documentation of every lie Derek told about my financial situation and character. Text messages, email conversations, and detailed notes from family members who repeated his false claims to me. Marcus looked impressed by my thoroughness. When did you start documenting everything? About 6 months ago, I admitted. I started noticing patterns in how family conversations about money always seemed to center around my obligations to provide support, but never acknowledged my contributions. I also noticed that Derek was asking for help more frequently while simultaneously making comments that suggested he resented my success. I turned to look directly at Derek. When Mrs. Henderson asked me about the money you borrowed from her, I realized your problems were bigger than unemployment. That's when I started keeping detailed records of our financial interactions. Uncle Bill was staring at the folder like it was a snake. Ariana, this seems extreme. We're family. We should be able to work things out without involving outside authorities. Bill Derek stole over $3,000 from a 92-year-old man's emergency medical fund. That's not a family disagreement. That's a serious crime that put an elderly person at risk. Sarah looked worried. What happens now with the Elder Protective Services investigation? They'll interview Derek, Grandpa, Joe, Mrs. Henderson, and anyone else who might have relevant information, I explained. If they determine that elder abuse occurred, they'll refer the case to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges. Derek was pacing now, his hands shaking. I can't go to jail. I can't handle jail, especially not with the gambling debts hanging over me. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from elderly people, I said without sympathy. Stephanie was crying again. Ariana, please. Isn't there some way to stop this investigation? Derek said he was going to pay Grandpa Joe back. With what money? I asked. The money he was going to win gambling. The money he was planning to borrow from more family members. Derek has no realistic plan for paying anyone back because he's still actively addicted to gambling. Marcus looked proud of my preparedness and resolve. Ariana, this documentation shows incredible foresight and responsibility. It shows paranoia and betrayal, Harold said angrily. What kind of person secretly documents their family interactions like they're building a legal case? The kind of person who recognizes abusive patterns and wants to protect herself and other vulnerable people, Marcus replied firmly. I pulled out the final section of documents. There's one more thing. This folder also contains financial records showing exactly how much support I've provided to each family member over the past 2 years. Every spa payment, every golf membership fee, every car payment, every prescription copay. Patricia looked confused. Why do you have all that documented? Because I've been preparing for this day for months, I said honestly. I knew that eventually Derek's manipulation would create a crisis, and I knew the family would pressure me to solve it. I wanted to have clear records of my generosity, so there could be no question about whether I've done enough for this family. The room was completely silent as everyone absorbed the implications of my documentation and preparation. They were beginning to understand that my decision to cut off financial support wasn't an emotional reaction to Derek's Christmas behavior. It was a carefully considered choice that I had been planning for months. Ariana, Grandpa Joe said quietly, what's going to happen to Derek with this investigation? That depends on Derek, I said honestly. If he cooperates with the investigation, enters genuine addiction treatment, and makes realistic restitution arrangements, the prosecutor might be willing to consider alternatives to jail time. But if he continues to deny responsibility or tries to manipulate the situation, he'll likely face serious criminal charges. Derek stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was a mixture of fear, anger, and something that might have been respect for my thoroughness and resolve. You really planned all of this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I plan to protect myself and other vulnerable people from your abuse, I replied. What happens next is entirely up to you. 3 months later, I was sitting in my Portland apartment on a sunny March afternoon, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating Christmas day. The morning light was streaming through my living room windows, highlighting the beautiful bouquet of spring flowers that Marcus had brought me the night before. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely peaceful and free from the constant stress of managing family crises. Derek had indeed faced consequences for his actions, but they had unfolded more constructively than anyone had expected. The Elder Protective Services investigation had been thorough and professional, resulting in a referral to the prosecutor's office for charges of elder financial abuse. However, Derek's attorney had negotiated a plea agreement that required him to enter court-mandated gambling addiction treatment and pay full restitution to his victims over a structured timeline. Derek was now 6 weeks into an intensive outpatient addiction program, and according to Grandpa Joe, who had maintained limited contact with him, Derek was taking the treatment seriously for the first time in his life. The court-ordered restitution plan meant Derek would be paying back money to Grandpa, Joe, Mrs. Henderson, and other family members for the next 3 years. But the structured accountability seemed to be helping him understand the real impact of his choices. Most importantly, Derek had written me a letter from treatment, not asking for anything, but taking full responsibility for his manipulation and abuse. The letter was 3 pages of detailed acknowledgement of specific ways he had lied about me, undermined my relationships with family members, and used my generosity against me while struggling with his own shame and addiction. He apologized without making excuses and explicitly stated that he understood why I had cut off financial support and reported his crimes. The letter had moved me to tears, not because it changed my boundaries, but because it showed genuine insight and accountability that I had never seen from Derek before. For the first time, I had hoped that my brother might actually recover and become someone capable of healthy relationships. The impact on the rest of my family had been more complicated, but ultimately positive. Patricia and Harold had been forced to downsize significantly when they realized how much their lifestyle had depended on my quiet financial support. They sold their large suburban home and moved into a smaller townhouse, and Harold had taken early retirement from his consulting business to spend more time with Grandpa Joe. Surprisingly, this forced simplicity had improved their relationship. Without the stress of maintaining an expensive lifestyle, Patricia had stopped her constant entertaining and started volunteering at a local literacy program. Harold had joined a community center where he played chess with other retirees and had developed genuine friendships that weren't based on business networking. Stephanie had indeed moved back in with our parents temporarily while she adjusted to making her own car payments, but the experience had motivated her to pursue a promotion at work and take on freelance photography projects. She was actually earning more money than she ever had before and had started saving for her own home purchase. Most significantly, the family had rallied around Grandpa Joe in ways that had nothing to do with money. Harold visited him daily. Stephanie helped him with grocery shopping and household tasks, and even Uncle Bill had started, including Grandpa Joe in weekend activities. The elder abuse investigation had shocked everyone into recognizing how vulnerable Grandpa Joe had become, and they had responded with genuine care and attention. I had made one exception to my financial boundaries. I continued covering Grandpa Joe's prescription medications because he was the innocent victim of Derek's theft and needed ongoing medical care. However, I worked with Harold to establish a family contribution system where everyone pitched in according to their ability, so the financial responsibility wasn't solely on my shoulders. Marcus and I had grown closer through the crisis, and his support during that difficult Christmas day had shown me what healthy partnership looked like. He had never tried to pressure me to reconcile with my family or questioned my boundaries. Instead, he had helped me process my emotions while respecting my decisions completely. We had gotten engaged in February, and we were planning a small wedding focused on celebrating our commitment rather than managing family drama. I had redirected my charitable giving toward organizations that help domestic violence survivors achieve financial independence. Working with women who were escaping abusive relationships had given me perspective on my own experience and reinforced my understanding that financial abuse was a serious issue that required firm boundaries and professional intervention. The family had initially tried to maintain contact while hoping for financial reconciliation. Christmas cards and birthday wishes had carried subtle hints about their financial struggles and Derek's ongoing legal troubles, but I had maintained my boundaries, consistently offering emotional support for genuine problems while refusing to resume financial enabling. Derek's letter from treatment had been the turning point. His genuine accountability and explicit statement that he understood my boundaries had opened the door for careful, limited contact. We had exchanged a few emails where Derek updated me on his treatment progress, and I shared appropriate details about my life with Marcus. The family gatherings had resumed on a much smaller scale focused on time together, rather than elaborate celebrations. Patricia had learned to cook simpler meals, and Harold had started hosting chess tournaments in their smaller living room. The gatherings were actually more enjoyable because they were based on genuine connection rather than financial obligation. Looking back on that Christmas day, I realized that Derek's cruel rejection of my gift had been exactly the catalyst I needed to finally break free from years of dysfunction. His public humiliation had forced me to see clearly how the family had been treating me, and his gambling crisis had revealed their true priorities. The most important lesson I had learned was that real family relationships are built on mutual respect, genuine care, and emotional reciprocity, not financial obligation and guilt-based manipulation. Love doesn't require keeping score, but it also doesn't require accepting abuse or enabling destructive behavior. Marcus often reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary for healthy relationships. By refusing to enable Derek's addiction and the family's financial dysfunction, I had actually created space for more authentic connections based on who we were as people rather than what we could provide for each other. 3 months later, I was happier, healthier, and surrounded by people who valued me for my character rather than my bank account. Derek was getting the help he needed, the family was learning to function independently, and I was building a life based on mutual respect and genuine love. Justice hadn't come through revenge or punishment, but through natural consequences and the peace that comes from refusing to participate in dysfunction. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop enabling their worst behaviors and let them experience the results of their choices. I had learned that being truly needed by family means being valued for your presence, your perspective, and your love, not your ability to solve problems with money. Real family doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. As I finished writing in my journal that afternoon, I felt grateful for the courage to choose my own well-being over family dysfunction. The hardest decisions often lead to the greatest freedom, and I had finally learned the difference between being a loving family member and being a convenient source of financial rescue. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it helps anyone who might be dealing with similar family dynamics to understand that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for everyone's health and growth. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? How did you find the courage to prioritize your own well-being when family members made you feel guilty for not solving their problems? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let me know, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your strength. Sharing these stories helps other people realize they're not alone in dealing with difficult family dynamics, so please share this with anyone who might need to hear it. I hope you all find the courage to choose healthy relationships over comfortable dysfunction, and remember that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your well being for other people's comfort.